The whip cracked across Sheriff Zephyr Ironwood's face as he burst through the barn doors, his Colt .45 already drawn and cocked. Inside, 3 men stood around a terrified girl chained to a post, money-changing hands in the pale dawn light filtering through broken slats. "Step away from her, now." Zephyr's voice thundered through the cramped space, blood trickling from the fresh cut on his cheek. Silas Grimm, the territory's most wanted human trafficker, spat tobacco juice into the straw and slowly turned around. Well, Sheriff Ironwood, you're a day late and a $1 short, lawman. Transaction's already complete." The girl, she couldn't be more than 19, lifted her head, revealing violet eyes that blazed with defiance despite her desperate situation. Her auburn hair hung in tangled waves around a face that would have been beautiful if not for the bruises and tear tracks marking her pale skin. "The transaction ends now," Zephyr growled, his gun trained on Grimm's chest. "Release Persephone Ashworth immediately." Grimm's scarred face twisted into a cruel smile. "How do you know her name, Sheriff? Been watching this little dove, have you?" Zephyr's jaw tightened. "We'd been tracking Grimm's operation for months, following a trail of missing girls across 3 territories. When word reached him that Bartholomew Ashworth had sold his own daughter to pay gambling debts, Zephyr had ridden for 2 days straight to reach this godforsaken place. "I know because I've been hunting you, Grimm. And your buyer here," he gestured with his gun toward the well-dressed man counting money, "is about to find himself on the wrong end of justice." The buyer, a portly man in expensive clothes, raised his hands nervously. "Now see here. I paid good money for a human being." Zephyr cut him off. "Which makes you guilty of slavery, which was outlawed in this territory 5 years ago." Persephone's chains rattled as she struggled against them, her voice hoarse but fierce. "Don't go quietly, I'll fight every step of the way." Something in her tone, not broken, not defeated, but absolutely furious, sent a jolt through Zephyr's chest. Most victims he'd rescued were too traumatized to speak, but this girl burned with an inner fire that captivated him. "You won't have to fight, miss," he said softly, never taking his eyes off Grimm. "I'm here to take you home." Grimm laughed, a sound like grinding glass. "Homegirl doesn't have a home, Sheriff? Daddy sold her fair and square. Even got the papers. To prove it, papers don't mean anything when they're trading in human flesh," Zephyr snapped. "Drop your weapons and unlock those chains." Instead, Grimm's hand inched toward his holstered pistol. "I got 4 more men outside. Ironwood, you're outnumbered." Maybe Zephyr's smile was sharp as a blade, but I'm not outgunned. The first shot rang out as Grimm went for his weapon. Zephyr's bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his gun flying. The buyer screamed and dove behind a hay bale while Persephone pressed herself against the post. Chains clanking. Outside, boots thundered across the packed earth as Grimm's men responded to the gunfire. Zephyr holstered his smoking weapon and drew a second gun from his left hip, moving to position himself between Persephone and the door. "Whatever happens," he told her urgently, "stay down and stay quiet." Like hell, Persephone shot back, surprising him again. "Give me a gun, and I'll help you fight them." Zephyr glanced at her in amazement. Here was a girl who'd been sold like cattle, chained in a barn awaiting a fate worse than death, and she wanted to fight rather than cower. "Can you shoot?" he asked quickly as footsteps approached the barn. "My grandfather taught me before he died. I can hit a tin can at 50 yards. Without hesitation, Zephyr pulled a derringer from his boot and slid it across the floor to her. "Keys to those chains are on Grimm's belt. Free yourself and find cover." Persephone struggled with the locks, the barn doors exploded inward, and 4 armed men charged through. The real battle was about to begin. Gunfire erupted like thunder as Zephyr dove behind a feed trough, bullets splintering the wood above his head. Persephone had managed to free one wrist and was working frantically on the second lock while Grimm writhed on the ground, clutching his wounded shoulder and cursing like a sailor. "Burn them out," shouted one of Grimm's men, a tall scarecrow of a man with gold teeth. "Torch the whole damn barn." "Not with my merchandise inside, you fool," Grimm snarled from the floor. Zephyr seized the moment of confusion, rolling out from behind the trough and putting 2 quick shots into Gold Teeth's chest. The man dropped like a stone, his torch rolling harmlessly into the dirt. Persephone's second chain fell away with a clatter. instead of running for safety as Zephyr expected. She snatched up the keys and crawled toward Grim, staying low beneath the flying bullets. "What are you doing?" Zephyr called out, reloading with practiced speed, getting answers. Persephone grabbed Grim by his shirt collar, pressing the derringer against his temple, despite his wounded state. "Where are the others?" "The girls you took before me?" Grim's eyes widened in pain and fear. "I don't know what you're talking about, girl." "Liar." Persephone's voice cracked like a whip. "My friend Melody vanished 3 months ago. Red-haired, green eyes, 17 years old. Where is she?" Another of Grim's men appeared in the doorway, rifle raised. Zephyr's shot took him down before he could fire, but not before the outlaw got off a wild shot that grazed Persephone's arm. She didn't even flinch, keeping the gun pressed to Grim's head. "Tell me, ... The mining camp," Grim gasped out. "Silver Creek Canyon. She's probably dead by now. They don't last long up there." Rage flashed across Persephone's face, and for a moment, Zephyr thought she might actually pull the trigger. Instead, she struck Grim across the temple with the gun, but knocking him unconscious. "Smart girl," Zephyr muttered, impressed despite the chaos around them. The remaining 2 outlaws had taken cover behind overturned wagons outside the barn, trading shots with Zephyr through the doorway. The baton paid-for buyer was still cowering behind the hay bale, whimpering with each gunshot. "Sheriff," Persephone called, crawling toward him with Grim's rifle in her hands. "There's a back way out through the feed room. I can circle around behind them." "Absolutely not," Zephyr said firmly, reloading again. "You've been through enough." "Those men killed my friend." Persephone's violet eyes blazed with determination. "This isn't over until they're all dead or captured," before Zephyr could stop her. She was moving toward the back of the barn with surprising stealth. He cursed under his breath. This girl was going to get herself killed with her heroics. A bullet whistled past his ear, refocusing his attention on the immediate threat. Through the doorway, he could see one of the outlaws trying to flank around the side of the barn. Zephyr put a shot into the man's leg, dropping him with a scream. That left 1 active shooter, plus whoever might be guarding their horses. Zephyr was considering his options when he heard a single gunshot from behind the barn, followed by a man's cry of surprise. Moments later, Persephone's voice rang out clear and strong. "Drop your weapons, or I'll put the next bullet through your spine." Instead of your shoulder, the remaining outlaw's rifle clattered to the ground as he raised his hands in surrender. Zephyr emerged from the barn to find Persephone standing behind the last man, her borrowed rifle steady as a rock despite the blood trickling down her wounded arm. "Impressive shooting, Miss Ashworth," Zephyr said, genuinely amazed. "Grandfather always said I had steady hands," she replied, though he could see them trembling slightly now that the danger had passed. "What do we do with them?" Zephyr looked around at the carnage, 2 dead, 3 wounded, and 1 cowering buyer still hiding in the hay. "We take them back to Millbrook for trial, all of them." As he began securing the prisoners with rope from his saddlebags, Persephone swayed slightly on her feet. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the reality of what she'd endured was setting in. "You should sit down," Zephyr said gently. "Let me look at that arm." "I'm fine," she insisted, but her voice lacked its earlier fire. "No, you're not. And that's perfectly normal after what you've been through." For the first time since he'd found her, Persephone's defiant mask slipped, revealing the frightened young woman beneath. He was going to... ... But they didn't, Zephyr said firmly, moving to her side. "And they never will. I give you my word on that." As he gently examined her wounded arm, Persephone looked up at him with those remarkable violet eyes. "Why did you come for me? You don't even know me." Zephyr paused in his ministrations, meeting her gaze. "Because no one should be bought and sold like property. Because... ... double quotes. He hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Because the moment I heard your name, I knew I had to find you." Something passed between them in that moment, a connection neither had expected, but both felt deeply. The ride back to Millbrook took 3 days, their prisoners secured, and Persephone riding beside Zephyr on a horse confiscated from Grim's gang. She'd insisted on helping guard the captives despite her wounded arm, proving herself as capable with a rifle as she'd claimed. "Tell me about Silver Creek Canyon," Persephone said as they made camp the second night, her voice carefully controlled. "Zephyr looked up from tending the fire, noting the determined set of her jaw. It's a played-out mining operation about 40 miles north of here, abandoned by the legitimate miners 2 years ago. But not abandoned by everyone. No. Zephyr's expression darkened. Men like Grimm use it as a staging area for operations. We can't talk about around decent folk. Persephone stared into the flames, her hands clenched in her lap. Melody is still alive. I can feel it. Persephone, don't. Her violet eyes flashed as she looked at him. Don't tell me to be realistic, or that I should accept what happened to her. Would you give up if it were your friend? Zephyr studied her face in the firelight, seeing the stubborn tilt of her chin that reminded him of himself at her age. No, I wouldn't. Then help me find her. It's too dangerous. The canyon is a fortress. I don't care about the danger. Persephone stood abruptly, pacing around the fire. Melody didn't choose this life. She was stolen, just like I was. Just like dozens of other girls across this territory. Zephyr watched her move, noting how she favored her injured arm but refused to acknowledge the pain. In 3 days of travel, he'd learned that Persephone Ashworth was unlike any woman he'd ever met. Fearless, principled, and absolutely relentless when she set her mind to something. The territorial governor has been pressuring me to clean out that canyon for months, he admitted. But I'd need a small army to do it properly. You'd need someone who could get inside without raising suspicion. Zephyr's blood ran cold as he realized what she was suggesting. Absolutely not. I won't let you put yourself in that kind of danger. Let me. Persephone stopped pacing and fixed him with a stare that could melt steel. Sheriff Ironwood, I appreciate your rescue, but you don't get to let me do anything. I'm not your property. Any more than I was Grimm's. The rebuke stung because it was fair. Zephyr had been thinking of her as someone to protect, rather than someone to work with, despite evidence that she could handle herself in a fight. You're right, he said quietly. I apologize, but I still think it's too risky. Persephone sat back down across from him, her expression softening slightly. My father sold me to pay his gambling debts. For that, he drank away our farm and our family's reputation. I've spent the last 2 years watching my world collapse piece by piece. She poked at the fire with the stick, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. For the first time since my mother died, I feel like I can do something that matters, something that might save innocent lives. What about your own life? Zephyr asked. Don't you want to go somewhere safe? Start over. With what? I have no money, no family worth mentioning, no prospects. Persephone's laugh was bitter. At least this way my life would mean something. Zephyr leaned forward, his voice intense. Your life already means something. To me, the words hung between them like a bridge neither quite dared to cross. Persephone's violet eyes widened slightly, reflecting the firelight. You barely know me, she whispered. I know you're brave enough to fight armed men while chained to a post. I know you're loyal enough to risk your life for a friend. You're strong enough to survive what would break most people. Zephyr's voice grew rough with emotion. And I know that somewhere in the last 3 days, I've fallen completely in love with you. Persephone's breath caught audibly. Zephyr. I know it's crazy, he continued, unable to stop now that he'd started. I know it's too fast, and too complicated, and probably too dangerous for both of us. But when I thought about you in that canyon, about what they might do to you, he shook his head. I can't lose you, Persephone. Not when I've just found you. She was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire while he waited for her response. When she finally looked up, tears glittered in her eyes. I've felt it too, she admitted softly. This connection between us. But Zephyr, I can't just run away and pretend those other girls don't exist. Melody's out there somewhere, probably praying for rescue just like I was praying in that barn. Hey. Zephyr closed his eyes, knowing he was about to make the most dangerous decision of his career. If we do this if we do it together, partners, Persephone agreed, extending her hand toward him as their fingers intertwined across the dying fire. Both knew they were sealing more than just a professional agreement. They were choosing each other, choosing love, choosing to fight for something bigger than themselves. In the distance, Coyote howled at the moon, its cry echoing across the vast wilderness like a warning of the dangers ahead. Silver Creek Canyon loomed before them like the mouth of hell, its jagged walls casting deep shadows, even in the afternoon sun. Zephyr and Persephone had spent a week in Millbrook preparing for this mission, gathering supplies, studying maps, and developing a plan that had roughly equal chances of success and disaster. "Remember," Zephyr said quietly as they approached, "the canyon's entrance, your Seraphina cross, sold by your uncle to pay his debts. You're scared, but not broken. Can you handle that?" Persephone adjusted the rope around her wrist, loose enough to slip free, but tight enough to look convincing. "I've had plenty of practice being sold recently," she said dryly. They'd agreed she would go in as a new acquisition, while Zephyr posed as the seller. Using contacts from Grimm's confession to establish his credibility, it was dangerous beyond measure, but it was also their best chance of locating Melody and the other missing girls. The first sentry challenged them at a narrow passage between two massive boulders. A grizzled man with more scars than teeth examined Zephyr's forged papers, while eyeing Persephone appreciatively. "Pretty little thing," the guard leered. "Beau'll be pleased. Been asking for fresh meat?" Persephone forced herself not to react, though Zephyr saw her hands clench into fists behind her back. They were escorted deeper into the canyon, where makeshift buildings and tents created a lawless settlement that reeked of desperation and cruelty. "How many girls?" Zephyr asked casually as they walked. "Maybe a dozen in the main quarters," the guard replied, "plus whatever boss keeps for his private collection." Persephone's step faltered almost imperceptibly. A dozen girls more than they'd hoped to find, but also more than they could icily rescue. The boss turned out to be a mountain of a man called Goliath Steele. His massive frame draped in expensive clothes that couldn't hide the violence in his pale blue eyes. He examined Persephone like she was livestock, walking around her while she stood perfectly still. "Name?" he asked her directly. "Seraphina Cross, sir," she replied, adding just the right tremor to her voice. "You caused trouble for your uncle?" "No. Sir, he just... ... he owed money to bad men." Steele nodded approvingly. "Good, I don't tolerate troublemakers." He turned to Zephyr. $300, as agreed. "She'll work the mining claims until I decide what else to do with her." Changed hands, Zephyr fought every instinct, screaming at him to draw his weapons and start shooting. But there were too many guards, too many innocent lives at stake. They had to play this out. "I'll show her to the quarters," Steele said, grabbing Persephone's arm roughly. "Actually," Zephyr interrupted smoothly, "I was hoping to stick around. For a day or two? Heard you might have other business opportunities?" Steele's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "What kind of opportunities?" "The kind that involve moving merchandise to buyers in California. I've got connections in San Francisco." Interest flickered in the big man's face. "We'll talk tonight. For now, get some rest." "Bunkhouses behind the main building," Steele dragged Persephone away. She caught Zephyr's eye briefly. In that glance, he saw fear, but also determination. She was ready for what came next. The women's quarters turned out to be a converted mining shed with barred windows and a single heavily guarded door. Inside, Persephone found 11 girls ranging in age from 15 to 25, all in various stages of despair and defiance. "New girl," announced the guard who'd brought her. "Boss says she works the claims starting tomorrow." As the door slammed shut behind her, Persephone quickly scanned the faces around her. In the back corner, hunched over a bowl of thin soup, she spotted familiar red hair and green eyes. "Melody?" she whispered. Her friend's head snapped up, hope and disbelief warring in her expression. "Persephone? Oh God, what are you doing here?" They embraced tearfully while the other girls watched with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Persephone quickly explained her presence, careful not to mention Zephyr's role as a lawman. "There's going to be a rescue," she whispered urgently. "Tonight? Maybe tomorrow. But I need to know how many guards. What's the routine?" An older girl named Constance, who'd clearly become the group's unofficial leader, answered in hushed tones. "6 guards during the day, for at night. They change shifts at midnight. Main weakness is they don't expect trouble from inside, because They think we're broken, added another girl bitterly. Well, they're about to learn otherwise, Persephone said grimly. Outside, Zephyr was making his own reconnaissance, noting guard positions and escape routes while maintaining his cover as a potential business partner. He'd identified at least 20 armed men in the canyon, not counting Steele himself. As the evening fell and the guards settled into their routines, both Zephyr and Persephone prepared for the most dangerous night of their lives. Everything depended on timing, luck, and their faith in each other. In a few hours, they would either free a dozen innocent women or die trying. Midnight struck with the tolling of a cracked bell hanging from the camp's watchtower. Zephyr waited in the shadows behind the bunkhouse, counting the seconds as guards changed shifts exactly as Persephone had predicted. For guards for the entire canyon, better odds than he dared hope for. Inside the women's quarters, Persephone had spent hours preparing the other girls. She'd torn strips from her petticoat to muffle the sound of the window bars being loosened with a makeshift file crafted from a broken spoon. Melody worked beside her, having regained some of her old spirit at the prospect of freedom. When I give the signal, Persephone whispered to the group, we go through the window one at a time. Stay low, stay quiet, and head for the rocks at the canyon's east wall. If we get separated, keep moving toward the main trail. The guards asked Constance nervously. Leave them to me and my partner, Persephone replied, checking the derringer she'd kept hidden in her boot. At 12:15. Zephyr moved toward the guard shack where two men sat playing cards by lamplight. He'd counted on their overconfidence after all, who would be foolish enough to attack a fortified canyon with only two people. The first guard never knew what hit him as Zephyr's gun, but connected with his skull. The second reached for his weapon but found himself staring down the barrel of Zephyr's Colt instead. Make a sound and die, Zephyr whispered. Nod, if you understand. The guard nodded frantically, and Zephyr quickly bound and gagged him with rope from his own lasso. 2 down, 2 to go. Meanwhile, Persephone had worked the last window bar free. The opening was barely large enough for a person to squeeze through, but it would have to do. She went first, dropping silently to the ground outside before helping the others through one by one. Melody was halfway out when disaster struck. Goliath Steele emerged from the main building, apparently unable to sleep. His massive silhouette was unmistakable as he walked directly toward the women's quarters. Go, go, go. Persephone hissed urgently, pulling Melody through the window just as Steele's heavy footsteps approached the door. The girls scattered toward the rocks as planned. But Persephone stayed behind, knowing someone had to buy them time. She pressed herself against the building's wall just as Steele unlocked the door and stepped inside. His roar of rage echoed through the canyon like a wounded bear. They're gone. All of them. Guards. Guards. Persephone slipped away from the building. As chaos erupted throughout the camp, men stumbled from tents and bunkhouses, some only half-dressed, all shouting questions and demands. Find them, Steele bellowed. Search every inch of this canyon. They can't have gone far. But Zephyr had anticipated this too. While the camp focused on the missing women, he circled around to where the gang kept their horses. A few quick cuts to the restraining ropes sent most of the animals scattering into the night, severely limiting pursuit options. The remaining guards, those not unconscious, were tied up, split into groups to search the canyon. Zephyr picked them off one by one. Using the darkness and his knowledge of their patrol routes against them, Persephone had almost reached a rendezvous point when a hand grabbed her shoulder and spun her around. She found herself face to face with a guard she hadn't seen before, wiry man with cruel eyes and a knife already drawn. Well, well, he sneered. The new girl's trying to run away? Boss is going to want to make an example of you, I don't think. So Persephone replied calmly and shot him. The derringer's bark was lost in the general chaos, and the guard dropped like a stone. Persephone stepped over his body and continued toward the rocks where the other girls waited. Everyone here? She whispered as she reached them. All present, Constance confirmed. But there are men coming this way with torches. Persephone could see the lights bobbing through the darkness, getting closer by the minute. Where was Zephyr? Had something gone wrong? Her question was answered. Moments later, when a tremendous explosion rocked the canyon. The main building where Steele kept his money and records erupted in flames that lit up the night sky like a beacon. "That's our cue," Persephone said grimly. "Everyone move, now." They fled through the canyon's east passage as Zephyr had planned, the girls supporting each other and moving with desperate determination. Behind them, Steele's voice rose above the chaos, screaming orders that nobody seemed able to follow at the canyon's mouth. Zephyr waited with horses he'd liberated from the gang's own stock. His face was blackened with soot from the explosion, but his smile was brilliant as he saw Persephone leading the group to safety. "Cutting it a little close, weren't you?" she asked breathlessly as he helped her onto a horse. "I like to make an entrance," he replied, swinging up behind her. "Everyone ready?" 12 women on 6 horses, not ideal for speed, but it would have to do. As they rode hard away from Silver Creek Canyon, the flames behind them painted the sky orange and red, marking the end of Goliath Steele's evil empire. But their ordeal wasn't over yet. Dawn would bring pursuit. They still had 40 miles of dangerous territory to cross before reaching safety. The pursuit began at first light, with Goliath Steele leading 8 men on the few horses Zephyr hadn't scattered. They followed the obvious trail left by 12 women and 6 horses, their faces grim with the promise of violence. Zephyr had anticipated this, choosing a route that led through rocky terrain where tracks would be harder to follow, but with double riders on every horse, they couldn't maintain the speed necessary to stay ahead indefinitely. "We need to split up," he told Persephone as they paused to rest the horses near a creek. "Take the girls north toward Millbrook. I'll lead the pursuit south." "Like hell," Persephone replied flatly. "We're not separating now. It's the smart play." "It's the coward's play," she interrupted. "And you're not a coward, Zephyr Ironwood?" "Neither am I." Melody, who'd been listening to their heated whisper argument, spoke up. "There's another way. Devil's Ridge has a hidden passage that most people don't know about. My grandfather used to run cattle through there during the Indian troubles." "How hidden?" Zephyr asked, hope flickering in his chest. "Hidden enough that we could lose them completely if we time it right." The passage turned out to be a narrow cut between 2 massive rock formations that looked impassable from a distance. The horses had to go single file, and there were moments when the riders had to dismount and lead them through spaces barely wide enough for the animals. But Melody was right. It was perfect for losing pursuit. By the time Steele's men reached the area, Zephyr's group had vanished like smoke. "Where the hell did they go?" Steele roared, his massive frame trembling with rage. His tracker, a half-breed named Wolf Carson, studied the ground carefully. "Trail just ... stops, like they flew away. Nobody just disappears." Steele backhanded Carson across the face. "Find them." But as the hours passed and no trace of their quarry emerged, even Steele had to admit defeat. The women were gone, his camp was destroyed, and his reputation as an untouchable criminal was in ruins. Meanwhile, Zephyr's group emerged from Devil's Ridge into a valley blooming with wildflowers. For the first time since their escape began, the rescued women allowed themselves to believe they might actually survive. "It's beautiful," whispered a girl named Luna, who hadn't spoken since leaving the canyon. "It's freedom," Constance added, tears streaming down her weathered face. That evening they made camp in a protected grove near a clear stream. As the women bathed and tended their wounds, Persephone and Zephyr walked upstream to talk privately. "What happens now?" she asked, settling beside him on a fallen log. "Now you're all free to go wherever you want," Zephyr replied. "I've got money saved that can help with travel expenses, new starts." "What about us?" The question hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Zephyr took her hands in his, noting how perfectly they fit together despite everything they'd been through. "That depends on what you want, Persephone. I know I love you, that hasn't changed. But you've got choices now that you didn't have before." Persephone studied his face in the twilight, seeing the uncertainty he was trying to hide. "Do you know what I thought about during those 3 days in that horrible place?" He shook his head. "I thought about a life where someone valued me for who I am, not what I could do for them. A life where I could be strong and still be loved. A life with you." Zephyr's breath caught. "Are you sure?" "Because I'm just a sheriff in a small town." I can't offer you riches or society. I don't want riches or society, Persephone interrupted, moving closer to him. I want a partner. Someone who sees my strength as an asset instead of a threat. Someone who will fight beside me instead of trying to protect me from everything. I can do that, Zephyr said softly, cupping her face in his hands. I can be that man. Their kiss was sweet and desperate and full of promises for tomorrow. When they finally broke apart, Persephone was smiling through her tears. So what's the plan, Sheriff Ironwood? Well, Mrs. Soon-to-be Ironwood, he grinned. I was thinking we get these ladies safely to Millbrook, then have ourselves a wedding. After that, I hear the territorial government is looking for a sheriff for the new county they're creating up north, and you'd think we'd be good at bringing law and order to the frontier? I think we'd be unstoppable. As they walked back to camp hand in hand, the other women looked up at them with knowing smiles. Love had a way of shining through even the darkest circumstances. And everyone could see that Persephone and Zephyr had found something rare and precious. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight was for hope and healing and the promise of a future built on love and mutual respect. 6 months later, Zephyr Ironwood and his wife Persephone stood on the porch of their new home in Redemption Valley. Watching the sun set over the town they'd helped establish, the community had grown around their shared vision of a place where everyone, regardless of their past, finds safety and purpose. The Washington store is doing well, Persephone observed, nodding toward the general store run by Constance. Washington and her new husband, a carpenter named Isaiah, who'd arrived with the last wagon train. And Melody's school has 15 students now, Zephyr added proudly. His wife's best friend had discovered a talent for teaching that surprised everyone, including herself. The other rescued women had scattered to various destinations, but most had stayed in touch. Luna had married a rancher in Colorado. Several others had used Zephyr's financial help to start businesses in San Francisco. All were thriving in their new lives. Any regrets? Zephyr asked, slipping his arms around Persephone from behind. She leaned back against his chest, her hands resting on her gently rounded belly, where their first child grew strong and healthy. About which part? Marrying a lawman who insists on taking the most dangerous assignments? Moving to the middle of nowhere to start a town from scratch? Or carrying the baby of said stubborn lawman? Any or all of the above, Zephyr chuckled, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Not a single one, Persephone said firmly, though I reserve the right to complain loudly during childbirth. Their peaceful moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Deputy Marcus Fletcher rode up with a prisoner in tow. A man Zephyr recognized as Bartimus Wade, a cattle rustler who'd been terrorizing ranchers 50 miles south. Caught him red-handed, Sheriff, Marcus reported, dismounting and securing the prisoner. Had 20 head of Morrison cattle with altered brands. Good work, Marcus. Zephyr started toward the jail, then paused as Persephone touched his arm. Careful, she said softly. Wade's got a reputation for being slippery. Always am, Zephyr replied, kissing her forehead. Besides, I've got the best deputy in the territory and a wife who's scarier than any outlaw when she's protecting what's hers. As Zephyr walked Wade to the jail, Persephone smiled and returned to their evening routine. She'd been reviewing applications for the town's new deputy position. Their growing community needed more law enforcement. She'd become Zephyr's unofficial partner in screening candidates. An hour later, Zephyr returned to find her sitting at their kitchen table with paperwork spread before her. The lamplight caught the copper highlights in her hair, and he marveled again at how beautiful she looked carrying their child. Find anyone promising? He asked, settling into the chair beside her. Actually, yes. Persephone held up a letter written in neat handwriting. Jeremiah Stone, formerly a Pinkerton detective. Excellent references, experience with organized crime. And get this, he specifically requested assignment to a town that takes a progressive approach to women's rights. Zephyr raised an eyebrow. Progressive approach. Apparently word has gotten out that the sheriff of Redemption Valley actually listens to his wife's opinions and considers her an equal partner. Persephone's smile was teasing but proud. Shocking behavior for a lawman, I'm told. Shocking indeed. Zephyr agreed solemnly. What will people think when they learn I also let you carry a gun and solve crimes? that you're either very smart or very stupid, depending on their perspective. Their banter was interrupted by a commotion outside, shouting voices and the sound of running feet. Zephyr was on his feet instantly, hand moving to his gun, but Persephone was already at the window. "It's not trouble," she said quickly. "It's celebration. The Patterson baby looks like little Catherine decided to arrive tonight." Indeed, through the window they could see Dr. Nathaniel Crenshaw hurrying toward the Patterson house with his medical bag, while neighbors gathered in the street to offer support and prayers. "Life continues," Zephyr observed, relaxing slightly. "New babies, new families, new hopes." "Speaking of which," Persephone said, turning to face him with a mischievous glint in her violet eyes, "I had an interesting conversation with Melody today. Seems she's been receiving letters from a certain school teacher in Denver. A male school teacher. Romance in the air?" "Romance everywhere, apparently. Even tough-as-nails Sheriff Ironwood went soft for a girl he rescued from human traffickers." Zephyr moved to stand behind her chair, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. "That girl rescued herself. And about a dozen others. And then proceeded to rescue me from a life of loneliness and duty without purpose." Persephone reached up to cover his hands with hers. "We rescued each other." Outside, the sounds of celebration continued as little Catherine Patterson made her debut into the world. Inside their home, Zephyr and Persephone sat in comfortable silence, planning for their own child's arrival and the future they were building together. "I love you, Persephone Ironwood," Zephyr said quietly. "And I love you, Zephyr Ironwood, my partner, my equal, my heart." As if responding to his parents' voices, the baby kicked strongly, making Persephone gasp with surprised laughter. Zephyr's hand moved to her belly. They felt their child moving beneath his palma, life they'd created together, a future full of infinite possibilities. The next morning brought word that Bartimus Wade had confessed to rustling cattle across 3 counties, providing information that would help other sheriffs capture his associates. Justice, it seemed, was finding its way even to the most remote corners of the territory. Jeremiah Stone arrived on the afternoon stage, proving to be exactly what his letter had promised: competent, respectful, and genuinely committed to the principles that made Redemption Valley special. He also brought news from the territorial capital that their unconventional approach to law enforcement was being studied as a model for other frontier communities. "Seems you two are becoming famous," Stone observed over dinner at the town's new restaurant, run by another rescued woman who'd discovered a talent for cooking. "Infamous, more likely," Persephone replied with a laugh. "Oh, I suppose there are worse things than being known as the town where women can speak their minds and carry weapons, and where justice actually means something," Zephyr added. "Where people's past doesn't define their future, and everyone gets a chance at redemption." As the months passed, and Persephone's pregnancy progressed, their reputation continued to grow. Other women who'd escaped difficult situations began arriving in Redemption Valley, drawn by stories of a place where they could rebuild their lives without shame or judgment. The town prospered accordingly. Businesses thrived, families grew, and the community developed a character unlike anywhere else in the American West. It's a place where strength was valued over tradition, where capability mattered more than gender, and where love conquered all manner of obstacles. On a crisp autumn morning, as golden leaves danced in the mountain breeze, Persephone gave birth to a daughter they named Libria, name that seemed to capture everything they'd fought for and achieved together. Zephyr held his newborn daughter while his wife rested, marveling at the tiny fingers and perfect features of this new life they'd created. Liberty had her mother's violet eyes and her father's determined chin, and he could already tell she was going to be a force to be reckoned with. "She's perfect," Persephone whispered, exhausted but glowing with happiness. "Just like her mother," Zephyr replied, settling the baby into Persephone's arms. As they sat together in their bedroom, the autumn sunlight streaming through the windows, and their daughter sleeping peacefully between them, both knew they'd found something rare and precious. Love that had not only survived the worst of circumstances, but had flourished into something even more beautiful. Outside, Redemption Valley buzzed with the sounds of a thriving community. Children played in the streets while their parents worked and built and dreamed of the future. The church bell rang out across the valley, calling people to celebration and thanksgiving. And in the sheriff's house at the edge of town, a family, born from rescue and strengthened by trial, looked ahead to a future bright with promise and hope. The girl who'd once been sold at dawn had found her home. The sheriff who'd ridden to her rescue had found his heart. And together, they'd built something that would last for generations, a love story written in courage, sealed with trust, and blessed with the promise of tomorrow in Redemption Valley. Everyone's story could have a happy ending. And this one, born from the darkest of beginnings, had become the brightest of all.